Begin with No Kings protests as opposition to President Trump's agenda continues to grow. Organizers are predicting a large turnout today, with more than 3,300 demonstrations planned in cities and towns nationwide. This will mark the third No Kings protest to occur during Trump's second term. According to organizers, nearly 7 million people attended the last demonstration on October 18, 2025. And since then, Trump has severely ramped up his anti-democratic behavior and unpopular policies. He tried and failed to indict 6 Democratic lawmakers after they told members of the military and intel communities that they didn't have to comply with unlawful orders, accusing them of seditious behavior punishable by death. Then, Trump forced a regime change in Venezuela by arresting its president. And now, of course, we're in the middle of a war with Iran that Trump has started without congressional approval. Meanwhile, he sent the FBI to seize ballots in Atlanta and is currently pushing a bill that experts say will suppress votes. Plus, gas prices are soaring and millions are without health insurance, and his immigration crackdown has intensified. We saw the death of 2 American citizens at the hands of federal agents in Minneapolis, and that crackdown will be a major focus of No Kings tomorrow, with the protest flagship event being held in the Twin Cities. We'll talk to Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison later this hour. Guys, let's run through the list so far of who is actually lined up to speak in St. Paul, because there are a lot of superstars.
Quite a crew.
We've got Joan Baez. Eugene, do we know who she is?
Big fan.
Jane Fonda, Maggie Rogers.
Eugene for being young.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. And for not having watched the Bob Dylan movie. But I digress. Bruce Springsteen, Senator Bernie Sanders, Attorney General Keith Ellison, St. Paul Mayor, and Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan.
It's it's a good reminder that the center of all of this, where the most anger has been and the most pain has been over the last months, is from Minnesota, right? They were the center of kind of the biggest and most shocking part of the immigration enforcement internally, with the 2 deaths of these folks. And also the center of the resistance, right? Minnesota is not a place that is going to sit back and take it, right? They have for years been building civilian infrastructure for when things go bad. They're like, oh, no, we're not taking that. And so them standing up and saying, we're not going to allow you to just snatch up our neighbors. And now being the center of this big protest, we're saying we're not going to accept a king as president.
One of the things that we saw in Minnesota was neighbors helping neighbors. Right. We saw this very organized, very, peaceful, despite the murder of 2 citizens, this peaceful pushback, these people working together, bringing food to their neighbors who were scared to leave their houses. Michelle was on earlier, and she talked about that. So what I think has been kind of amazing about Minnesota is just the way they work together. And when we've heard Jane Fonda was talking yesterday about this, about why they were coming to Minnesota, and because it was such a great example of a sort of peaceful, organized group of neighbors helping other neighbors.
And actually, Jane Fonda, we should note, was in Washington, D.C. last night. I really hope she made her flight to St. Paul this morning, considering all of the traffic. But one of those protesters that Molly was just talking about is first-grade teacher Maria Heavener. She's from Funston Elementary School in Logan Square, Chicago, and she recently testified before Congress about the trauma that President Trump's immigration crackdown is bringing to classrooms across the country. Back in October, federal agents threw a tear gas canister from their vehicle onto a street in Logan Square near the elementary school. Here's Heavener describing the aftermath of that day.
My students were fearful and anxious. 6-year-olds were asking me what a tear gas canister does. They repeatedly asked, why? Why do they want to take people? 2 weeks later, one of my students had a panic attack in class. His little body froze. His eyes welled up in tears, and he began to shake. He worried that his family members would be taken because they have dark skin, even though they are citizens from Puerto Rico. Our youngest students are still dealing with anxiety even now. Our counselors have noted a sizable increase in behavioral health referrals since last October. mostly for students exhibiting signs of depression and anxiety.
And Maria Hebner joins us now. Good morning, Maria. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Can you talk a little bit about what it was like testifying on Capitol Hill this week before we get to the protest element here, and whether you feel like your message was heard beyond the Democratic lawmakers that were sitting in that room?
I really hope so, because I spoke on behalf of my students. I was even able to bring some letters from my students that day to really express how it impacted them. That last Friday in October, we experienced something really scary as a school, where it was just a regular Friday, and I was teaching my students, and there were other classes at lunch and recess. And a teacher had gone across the street to grab some lunch when I got a message from her that ICE was right across from our school. And she had a whistle on her, so she started blowing that, and a small crowd of neighbors started to form on the sidewalks. And very quickly, they rolled down their windows and started throwing out tear gas canisters without regard for anyone's safety. We had students that were still at recess. So thankfully, we were able to implement some protocols that we had created, and we got them inside very quickly to keep them safe from chemical exposure. We had to keep our windows closed all day, and our school was on soft lockdown. And I know on that day that students were very scared and confused, especially scared that their parents or friends or neighbors could be taken. And the long-term impact has been an increase in behavioral health referrals for our counselors for students that have anxiety and depression, so much so that we might end up needing more counselors for that.
Maria, there's two things that you said that were shocking and I think disturbing, and I think a lot of viewers are going to find it that way too. One, the protocols that you guys already had to put in place if something like this were to happen, and this is an elementary school. Two, you talked about those letters that your students wrote that you brought here. I want to read from some of those. From the first one. It's terrible how people who immigrated to the United States can't have liberty. Where is the justice for all? I feel broken because my community is falling apart. Another, ICE agents were throwing tear gas, knowing there's a school right next to where they were throwing it. But they didn't care. I was scared. Something horrible was going to happen. It was a horrible experience to witness. The last, I am a human, not an alien. I am a Mexican American. We are not criminals. These are children, and what they experienced is directly connected to what we're seeing today. Why people are so incensed. People who maybe voted for Trump 3 times, people who may have never gone to a protest in their lives are coming out today.
Yeah, definitely. I think their voices speak very strongly about their experiences. One of the students in those letters has already experienced a family member getting deported, so he knows what that pain and grief is like. And my students are strong and powerful, and I'm here backing up their voices, both today and I'll be out here on May 1st. In addition to the fear of immigration, 97% of my students come from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, so they're already up against pretty difficult odds. And I am at the point where I am crowdfunding from friends and family to be able to get snack for my students in the classroom. And so they have challenges from multiple fronts. And so I'll be out here today on No Kings, and I'll be out here on May Day, May 1st, and I'll continue to show up for my students to call on our president and our governor to make sure that our schools are places that are safe and fully funded, because I've been a teacher for 16 years, and this is what I know. Students have to have full bellies, and they have to feel safe to be able to learn.
Maria, how old are your students?
My students are 6 and 7, but I've worked at the school for quite a while. So the letters are from some of my previous students, and those were 6th graders writing to Congress.
Wow. Thank you so much for joining us. So important.
Thank you.
Just heartbreaking.